Thank you, Helen, and good evening, everybody. Good evening, Carlovians. Thank you to the Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society for inviting me here this evening. Now, it is possible that there are some very confused people in the audience here, because tonight is also the opening night of the Carlow Comedy Festival. So if you are here by accident and you're expecting this to be a comedy routine, now is the chance to flee. This is not comedy, we're not funny. But tomorrow night, I gather, if you are going to be here, they're going to have Neil Delamere, Martin Angelo, Aoife Dunn and Kevin McGahern rocking the joint for some Carlow comedy. In any event, it is lovely to launch to this, the 2026 edition of Carloviana. There's two things I've always loved about Carloviana. One is the name, Carloviana. It is a lovely word, full of the promise of the Mediterranean and sunshine and succulent wine, even on grizzly days like today. And we are all, or most of us, are Carlovians. And I was trying to work out when that name, when the word Carlovian, where its origin came from. I've got back as far as 1839, when it turns up in the Carlow Morning Post in a mildly derogatory political context, referring to a by-election. Carlovian agitators is the expression they use. By the 1860s, St. Patrick's College is using it for its students, past and present, but maybe somebody has done a deeper dive and can go before 1839 to get an older connection. In any way, it is a wonderful word. The second reason why I love Carloviana is the content. Now, as mentioned, this is issue 74. 74 issues since 1947. When the first issue was published, which is going to be 80 years in 2 years' time, so great celebrations. But you're right, in the world of local history journals, it is a very respected journal. And there have been hundreds of essays and reviews and obituaries and photographs and illustrations and music and all the stuff that over those last eight decades. And that is an amazing resource for historians today, whether you're local or professional or amateur, and indeed, as you mentioned, for the historians of the future. We've talked about the editors. I did a tally. I was in touch with John about how many editors there have been. There have been 23 individuals who have been involved as editors. And needless to say, the winner of the Most Editing Person of the Year award is Martin Nevin, 15 years. John, we are, as Helen mentioned, we're looking forward to for the next edition, but I hope you're not too daunted by the prospect of remaining editor till the year 2034, if you want to take Martin's crown. But yes, the content. There is always so much to read, and the county is very rich in history. I'm a glutton for pretty much all of it. How far back? Well, in this, Barry Dalby. It brings us back to the formation of Mount Leinster and the Blackstairs about 300 or 400 million years ago, and I'm willing to accept that as a starting point. But there is heaps of good stuff here, and I'm just going to run through some of the highlights. Well, there are nothing but highlights. We kick off with some medieval marvels. Niall O'Neill does a deep dig into the landscape in and around Ballymoon Castle. It's a cracker of a castle, built in the 13th, early 14th century by Roger Bygod, the Earl of Norfolk. Niall Moore takes on the Book of Leinster and how it came into the ownership of Elisha O'Mora, the chieftain of Laois, around about the time he became the custodian of Roger Mortimer's lands here. That's medieval. You move to education, lots of stuff here. We've got Aisling Madden covers the 200-year history of Scoil Nua Lords in Tullow. Adam Kane, he takes on the investors and investments of the Pres here in Carlow. And Martin and Mac have teamed up to show how Carlow is led a national technological revolution by developing the prototype RTC, the Regional Technical College, here in Carlow on the site of the old workhouse. There is also no shortage of sport. On the cover, you haven't got the cover yet, have you? Okay, well, you will see a running man. And this is actually a memorial window from a house in Killuckturnon on the side of Mount Leinster. And the reason why we have it here is because it represents one of the stories, one of the essays in the book, which is by Michael Kinsella, and it's called The Little Flyer, and it's about a fella called J.J. Egan. And JJ was a pretty remarkable guy. He overcame considerable adversity to become a massive all-round athlete in the 1890s, early 1900s, dancing initially, then hurdles, and then high jumps and long jumps. He could jump 6 foot in the air, and he could jump 23 foot that way. The length of a minibus, this fella. An amazing man, but unfortunately tuberculosis got the better of him, poor fella. And there's a great essay in there. John Kelly has a piece on the 1926 Carlow County football final, also known as the Battle of Rathore, after which Greg Cullen never again played in a Carlow GAA competition. Oops. Fiona Brennan has a brilliant lead. Fiona's tracked down the two surviving members of the Grange Miners, who won the football championships in 1952, Ned Foley and Seamus Sweeney. That match was played at Dr. Cullen Park in Carlow before a referee with the fine name of Juggers Brennan. A Carlow man, actually. And the team was nicknamed the League of Nations because there were 8 players from Rathvilly, 1 from Ballon, 1 from Clonmore, and the other 9 from Grange, which sounds like a suspiciously large team, doesn't it? Anyway, if you're a farming man or an engineering enthusiast, look no further than Christopher Power's piece on sprockets and chains and pulleys and cedars and beat pullers that were all manufactured in Carlow. Or if you're a farmer who smokes and you fancy growing your own tobacco, well, have a read of Christopher McQuinn's take on how farmers once grew tobacco in and around Tullow, of all places. Although sadly, the Tullovian variety, the Tullovian leaf, never caught on like the Virginian and the Turkish ones. Speaking of Tullow, I can't go too much further without raising my hat again to Chris McQuinn for his biblical epic, Tullow Through the Ages. I know a number of you would have been at that launch. The book is reviewed here, and as said then and repeated now, it is a cracker of a book, so well done, Christy. What else do we have? We have Law and Order, Christopher Power, back again. He looks at courthouses, the architecture of the courthouses in Tullow and Bagnallstown. And he reckons the Bagnallstown courthouse is the work of Daniel Robertson, the Scots-American architect, who also built a place called Lisnavagh. So this is fascinating to me. Paul Maguire looks at the Crimean War cannon, the one outside the Carlow courthouse, that freshly restored 24-pounder. Inside the courthouse, we go to the dock. We met Jill McGrath, who won the History Prize. Her essay is on the imprisonment, execution and transportation of prisoners in County Carlow from 1830 to 1840, includes the ill-fated Lucinda Sly. James Ryan hones in on the 1st Carlow Cavalry, which is a militia from Michael, back in 1798, commanded by the dastardly Robert Cornwall, who you may have come across. Padraig Lane takes on Rathvilly's labourers in the land war. And Shay Kinsella looks at the Soldier's Song, as in our national anthem, and specifically at Cathal McDougall, who is the artist who wrote the musical arrangement for that, because he was born and raised just south of us on Dublin Street, number 13, Dublin Street. We also, earlier we met Ruby Hines, who won the History Prize for her account of her great-grandfather, Peter Hines, and his brother John of Borris, and their role in the War of Independence. And we met Kayla, the joint winner, who has a fine essay on the 1918 and 1923 elections. Walter Lacey gives us a run through, is it the rise and fall of the PDs, the Progressive Democrats, and their impact on Carlow from the 80s through to 2008. We're nearly there. I much enjoyed, John Garrahy has a study in here of Tim Healy, who was the first Governor General of the Irish Free State. He was elected in 1922. And John calls his essay, Always Give Flowers. And I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler alert, John, but for the reason he's called it this, you might recall the Phoenix Park murders of 1882, when Lord Cavendish and Mr. Burke were assassinated by the Invincibles. So Joe Brady's one of the Invincibles, he's sentenced to die, and just before his execution, he receives a small ivory crucifix. And this is gifted to him by no less a person than Lady Lucy Cavendish, the widow of the man who was killed in the park, allegedly by Joe, which is an extraordinary demonstration of forgiveness. Anyway, Tim Healy was a Parnellite MP at the time, and he was really impressed by what she did, so much so that he then sent flowers to be put on Lord Frederick Cavendish's grave in Derbyshire, where he lived in England. I think he might have done it regularly, not just a once-off. Anyway, this is back in the 1880s. Fast forward to 1922, when the British Prime Minister, Bonar Law, he asks the Duke of Devonshire to nominate his candidate, the guy he thinks should be the Governor General of the Irish Free State. And the Duke was a nephew of Lord Frederick Cavendish, and the Duke knew that Tim Healy put flowers on the grave. And one way or another, says John in this fine essay, that's why Healy got the nod and became the first Governor General. Always send flowers. And look, there are loads of other intriguing characters in here. We have Father Andrew Mullen, the priest who had 2 graves. Thomas Kinsler, who does his shopping at Mrs. Prendergast's shop in Graiguemanagh. The fireman Dickie Matthews. Poor Lawrence Hayden, who died of rabies. James Murphy, adventure story writer Deirdre Brennan, who co-founded Aigsha. We have the musings and the vignettes from Miles Kavanagh. We have the story of the McCabe's of Old Lachlan, who fetched it up in New Zealand, bedtime reading for all the family. Oh yes, and we have to acknowledge John Murphy, formerly of Drummond by St. Mullins, hailed as the first person from County Carlow to have exercised his rights as a free man of the City of London by crossing Southwark Bridge with a flock of sheep. John. And finally, there is a wonderful essay by David Barron called The Keepers of the Flame, about the oral tradition and rambling houses like the one that Eddie Mack used to keep in Clonmore. And well, hopefully some of you have by now heard of the Rathvilly Heritage Interest Group, a new body which Fiona Brennan, who's here this evening, she chairs. And we hosted a rambling night last year in Rathvilly. There was another one recently, but the one last year in Rathvilly, which you can read about, it was a wonderful night with lectures about railways and show bands and lots of music. And one of the highlights was when Patsy Cody, who you might know from the Blue Diamond, the show band back in the 50s and 60s, and he put his 92-year-old lips to his saxophone and had us all thumping along to an absolutely flawless version of When the Saints Go Marching In. A wonderful night. It is all here. Sports, music, education, politics, revolution, Carlow agitators. It's all here. And well done to all involved, the editorial staff, and the, I think, 25 contributors at least, anyway. And really, well, with that, I do declare Carloviana issue number 74 to be officially launched.